Dad, don't be like that. It was just money. That was the first thing I heard when I saw the empty bank statement. Just money. Just like that. With such coldness, my son. The same one who cried in my arms years ago because he couldn't sleep, was telling me that my entire life savings, 30 years of effort, hardship, and sacrifice were nothing more than just money. I felt the air leave my chest, as if I'd been hit by an invisible stone. I had trusted him. I had given him access to my account, just in case something ever happened to me. And that day, the day something truly did happen to me, was the day I discovered who my own son really was. But before I continue, I'd like to know if you subscribed to the channel and liked the video. This helps me see that you support me and enjoy my stories. Now, let's continue. It all started on a gray Monday morning, the kind that smells like exhaustion. I went to the bank to check on my savings, not because I was suspicious, but because I wanted to pay a full year's rent in advance. That way I could sleep peacefully, knowing I had a roof secured. I carried an envelope with my documents, a pen, and the same hope I had held onto throughout my entire working life. But when the bank teller looked at me with that mix of surprise and pity, I knew something was wrong. "Mr. Roberts, are you sure no one else has access to your account?" "Only my son," I replied, still naive. "But he would never," she interrupted me, lowering her voice. "The transfer was made by him 3 days ago. The entire balance." I stood there in silence. I didn't even understand what she was saying. "The entire balance?" I repeated, almost breathless. "Yes, sir. A significant amount sent to a travel agency in Cancun." I remember my hands started to tremble. The people in the bank were talking, keyboards were clicking, the air conditioning was humming, but I only heard one sentence repeating in my head. "Your son emptied your account." That same afternoon I went to find him. He lived in a modern apartment with a river view and furniture that smelled like new money. His wife Claire opened the door. "Oh, Mr. Roberts," she said, smiling falsely. "What a surprise! Did you come to see Daniel?" "Yes," I replied, trying to stay calm. "I need to talk to him." I walked in without waiting for an invitation. The floor was shining. The walls were adorned with travel photos, fake smiles, and foreign beaches. And there he was, my son, sitting on the sofa, phone in hand, with a glass of wine beside him. "Dad, don't make that face," he said without moving. "I was going to tell you." "Tell me what?" I asked. "That you used the money?" "My money? My life savings?" He shrugged. "Yeah. But don't get upset, old man. It was for a good cause." "A good cause?" I said, feeling my voice tremble. "Yeah. I took my father-in-law on a trip. The poor guy needed to relax." I just stared at him, unable to comprehend. "Your father-in-law?" "Yeah. Now he is a real father. He's always been there for us. He deserved a break." Those words, "Now he is a real father," were a direct blow to the heart. I felt the floor disappear beneath my feet. "And what was I, Daniel?" I asked him, my voice broken. "What was I all those years?" "Don't exaggerate," he replied, laughing condescendingly. "You're not going to D over a few bucks." I left without saying another word. I didn't trust my own voice. I was afraid that if I opened my mouth, something stronger than just words would come out. When I got home, I opened my nearly empty refrigerator, stale bread, a bottle of water, and half a tomato. I had to pay the rent the next day, but there was no money left. I cried in silence, not for the lost money, but for something much more painful. Having raised someone incapable of feeling shame, I didn't sleep that night. I just stared at the ceiling, remembering when Daniel was a child. The same child who would hug me when he was afraid of the dark. The same one who would cry if I didn't take him to the park on Sundays. What had happened to that boy? Where was the heart I thought I had formed with so much love? The following days were agony. The landlord came to collect, and I had to admit I couldn't pay. "You have 1 week, mister." "Roberts," he said, not harshly, but without compassion. I went out onto the balcony and looked at the cloudy sky. The city moved below, indifferent to my tragedy. Me, an old retiree, with empty pockets and a broken soul. It was then that I remembered something. A folder stored in a drawer from my years at the bank. Old documents, signatures, names, accounts I had never fully closed. I pulled everything out and spread it on the table. Among them, a yellowed sheet of paper caught my eye. A secondary account. In my name, created in 1991. I had never touched it. I didn't even remember opening it. The next day I went to the bank without much hope, just acting on instinct. When the young woman at the counter entered the number into the system, her expression changed. "One moment, please, Mr. Roberts," she said, and went to get the manager. He returned with a folder in his hand and a slight smile. "We haven't seen one of these in a long time, Mr. Roberts. Your account is still active and has investment activity." I looked at him, confused. Investment? Yes. A capital fund accumulated with over 30 years of interest. The world seemed to stop. He kept talking, but I wasn't listening anymore. I was only thinking about one sentence that ran through my mind like an electric current. My son thinks he left me with nothing. But what he didn't know was that the bank still had something saved for me. And in that instant, I knew the story wasn't over. It was just beginning. They say memory is a house without locks. You wander in without meaning to, and by the time you realize it, you're already trapped inside. That's what happened to me that night. While the manager talked about accumulated funds and compound interest, I wasn't thinking about money. I was thinking about my life. About everything it cost me to gather every dollar that now, because of my son's whim, had blown away like dust in the wind. Every number on that bank statement had a face, a memory, a piece of me. I left the bank with a strange feeling, half relief, half suppressed rage. I didn't know yet what that old account meant, but something in me, a spark I thought had died, began to. And, without knowing why, I ended up in front of the building where I had worked almost my entire life. The Atlantic Bank, my second home for over 30 years. I grew old there. It was there I became a father and a widower at the same time. I remembered my first years there. I was young, naive, with a beautiful wife and a son who was just learning to walk. We didn't have luxuries, but we had faith. Every morning I got up before dawn, put on the same white shirt ironed with care by Lucy, my wife, and left with a coffee in my hand, promising her that soon we would have a house with a garden. We never did get that house, but she always believed me. And that was enough. Lucy died when Daniel was 8, a car accident on a rainy night, and suddenly the whole world turned gray. I remember the hospital, the phone call, the silence in the hallway, the smell of disinfectant. I remember looking at my son and promising him, with a broken voice, that he would never lack anything, and I kept that promise, even when it left me empty. Daniel grew up among utility bills, lunches packed at 6 in the morning, and homework corrected after a double shift. Sometimes I would fall asleep at the table while he did his homework. Other times, I sold my vacation days to pay for his school supplies. When I bought him his first bicycle, I had to pawn my watch. I never told him. It was my pride to see him happy, and if something hurt me, I kept it silent. I always believed that love was shown by enduring. And I endured. When he turned 18, he went to a private university. I was working in the bank's investment department by then. I knew the accounts, the funds, the interest rates. I knew how to move money without risking it. And that's when I started saving a small part of my salary in an alternate account. Not for me, for him, for his future. So that one day he could have what I couldn't give him. It was my way of saying, "Son, your effort is worth it." I never imagined that, decades later, that same account would become my only defense. Daniel was always smart, charismatic, ambitious, quick with words. People admired him. And so did I. I felt proud when I saw him walk with his college degree. I thought I had succeeded. I thought my sacrifice had been worth it. But pride has a price. You think you are raising them with love, but sometimes what you are raising is arrogance. I didn't teach him the value of work. I taught him the value of the result. And that was a mistake. Because when you grow up receiving without struggling, you start to believe you are entitled to everything. I remember the day he moved in with Claire, his wife. He didn't ask for my opinion. He just informed me. She always looked at me like I was a piece of old furniture, an inconvenient presence. "Your father is so simple," she told Daniel once, thinking I couldn't hear. Simple. Maybe she was right. I never knew how to dress like the others, or speak with elegant phrases. But my simplicity held all the love in the world, a love she never understood. Over time, Daniel changed. He stopped visiting, stopped calling, stopped telling me about his life. I justified it. He's busy, I told myself. until one day I realized it wasn't busyness. It was disinterest. And even though it hurt, I accepted it, because parents learn to love even when they are no longer needed. That night, while looking at my old bank papers, I found a folded photograph among the documents. It was Daniel as a child, with a huge smile, riding his new bicycle. I held it in my fingers and realized something terrible. That boy didn't exist anymore. In his place was a man who only thought of himself. But I didn't hate him. I couldn't. Love doesn't disappear with betrayal. It just becomes quieter, sadder, but it's still there, beating in some corner of the soul. He was the one who taught me to save, to plan, to think long term. Roberts, he used to tell me, one day people will laugh at us for saving every dollar, but when they're asking for loans, we'll be sleeping soundly. I tore the edge of the envelope carefully. Inside, there was a letter and a folded document. I began to read. Dear James, if you are reading this, it means you finally came back to the bank. And that can only mean two things. Before he died, he left written instructions. The manager handed me a sealed envelope. This was kept in your file. He indicated it should only be opened if you returned to the bank. My heart skipped a beat. The envelope had my name written on it in blue ink. I recognized that handwriting, my old friend's, the only one who treated me with respect during my toughest years. Trembling, I put it in my pocket without opening it. I knew something important was inside, but I didn't want to read it yet, because, for the first time in a long time, I was afraid. Not of the money, but of what that letter might change in me. I looked at the sky as I left the bank. A group of gulls flew overhead, and I thought, maybe life doesn't always take away. Sometimes it just waits for the right moment to give back what you deserve. That morning I woke up to the sound of 3 sharp knocks on the door. It wasn't the mailman or a curious neighbor. It was the landlord. That man had a habit of knocking like someone demanding a debt from your soul, not just with his hand. I got up slowly, my heart still racing from the memories of the bank and the sealed envelope I had left on the table. I hadn't slept well. I dreamed of Lucy, my wife. I dreamed she was talking to me from the kitchen, her voice telling me, James, don't be afraid. What you saved wasn't just money. When I opened my eyes, I was alone, as always, and the envelope was still there, looking at me like a promise I didn't dare to open. Mr. Roberts! The landlord knocked again. I know you're in there. I took a deep breath and opened the door. He was a sturdy man, about 50, with a permanent frown and a smell of cheap cigars that filled the hallway. Good morning, mister. Ernest, I said, trying to smile. There's no good morning when you don't get paid, mister. Roberts, he replied, crossing his arms. I gave you a week. It's past, I know. But I promise you, in a few days. Promises, he interrupted. Promises don't pay the rent. I felt a heat rise up my neck, a mix of shame and anger. I swear this time will be different. I'm resolving an issue at the bank, and as soon as I have the money, I'll pay you. That's what everyone says, he snorted. But if you don't, I'll have to evict you. There was no threat in his tone, just exhaustion. And that hurt more, because even others were used to seeing me as an old man who couldn't keep his word. I'll give you 3 more days, he finally said. After that, I can't do anything. Thank you, I replied, lowering my gaze. When he closed the door, I stood there, staring at the floor. 3 days. That was all I had left before the little pride I still had crumbled. I went back to the table. The envelope was still there, untouched. I took a sip of cold coffee, sat down, and looked at it like one might look at a device that could explode. Only if you return to the bank, the manager had said. Return to what? To hope? To a past that no longer exists? I picked up the envelope with trembling hands. The blue ink of my name was a little faded, but I recognized the handwriting immediately. It was Cameron's, my old boss. A fair man, the kind they don't make anymore. He was the one who taught me to save, to plan, to think long term. Roberts, he used to tell me, one day people will laugh at us for saving every dollar, but when they're asking for loans, we'll be sleeping soundly. I tore the edge of the envelope carefully. Inside, there was a letter and a folded document. I began to read. Dear James, if you are reading this, it means you finally came back to the bank. And that can only mean 2 things. Either life hit you hard, or you decided to face it with the same dignity you've always had. 30 years ago, we opened a savings account in your name together, but I never told you that when I retired, I converted it into a protected long-term investment fund. I did it without telling you, because I know you. You would have wanted to use it for Daniel, and this money was meant for you. That night, while looking at my old bank papers, I found a folded photograph among the documents. It was Daniel as a child, with a huge smile, riding his new bicycle. I held it in my fingers and realized something terrible. That boy didn't exist anymore. In his place was a man who only thought of himself. But I didn't hate him. I couldn't. Love doesn't disappear with betrayal. It just becomes quieter, sadder, but it's still there, beating in some corner of the soul. He was the one who taught me to save, to plan, to think long term. Roberts, he used to tell me, one day people will laugh at us for saving every dollar, but when they're asking for loans, we'll be sleeping soundly. I tore the edge of the envelope carefully. Inside, there was a letter and a folded document. I began to read. Dear James, if you are reading this, it means you finally came back to the bank. And that can only mean two things. I thought about Daniel. I thought about Claire, his wife, about their arrogance, and I thought about how easy it would have been for me to go to the bank, transfer that money to my checking account, pay the rent, and move on. But I didn't, because something inside me told me this story wasn't over, that perhaps for the first time in my life, I had a chance to teach my son what it really means to lose. I looked at the empty envelope folded on the table. I tucked it inside my jacket like someone protecting a newly found heart. Then I turned off the light and lay down in the darkness. As sleep overcame me, I heard Cameron's voice in my head, clear, firm, almost fatherly. James, justice doesn't always come from the courts. Sometimes it comes from time, and time always collects its debts. I smiled in the silence. The clock struck 2 in the morning. I had 3 days before the eviction, but for the first time in a long time, I wasn't afraid. Because now, the old man everyone thought was defeated was just beginning to wake up. The dawn arrived with a different light. For the first time in weeks, the sun seemed kind. I got dressed in the same worn shirt as always, the one Lucy had mended before she died, and I put Cameron's envelope in the inside pocket of my jacket. As I looked at myself in the mirror, I noticed something in my eyes I hadn't seen in a long time. Determination. I was no longer an old man waiting for the world to pity him. I was a man ready to understand why life, after taking so much, was giving something back. I walked to the bank. The air smelled like fresh bread and old hope. Each step echoed my past. The sound of the marble floor, the voices of the staff, the murmur of impatient customers. It was like coming home after a war. The young woman at the counter, the same one who had helped me days before, recognized me immediately. Mr. Roberts, the manager was waiting for you. Please, go in. The manager's office smelled of wood and history. On his desk was a folder with my name and an old seal from the Atlantic Bank. The man, an Isaac Perry, greeted me with a professional but sincere smile. Thank you for coming, Mr. Roberts. Your case is particular. I'm not surprised, I replied. Nothing in my life has been easy. He smiled respectfully. Allow me to explain. This fund was created 32 years ago with an initial amount of $45,000 under a special program that no longer exists. Yes, I remember it, I said. My boss, Mr. Cameron, managed it. Exactly. He left very precise instructions before he died. He opened the folder and took out a document with Cameron's original handwriting and signature. Look at this. I leaned in to read. The holder, James Roberts, can only access this fund in the event he has lost all his primary assets. At that time, the bank must release the capital and its accumulated interest, as well as the associated preferred share. This fund cannot be transferred, sold, or shared until his death. Its purpose is singular, to guarantee a dignified retirement for a man who dedicated his life to work and honesty. I felt a lump in my throat. Cameron had left me an invisible shield. Insurance against betrayal, even from my own son. And what does this preferred share mean, I asked. The manager nodded. It means you are not only a beneficiary of the fund, you are also a symbolic co-owner of the bank, a 0.5% hereditary stake. I stared at him, not understanding. I'm sorry? That's right. It won't make you a millionaire, but it does give you voting rights in certain internal decisions, and the right to receive annual profit-sharing benefits. And all of this was just sitting here, saved for 30 years? Exactly. Untouched. I remained silent, looking at the document. The yellowed paper seemed to glow under the office light. It was as if Cameron was speaking to me from another time, from a lesson I was only now able to understand. Value isn't always in the money, but in what you represent. The manager offered me the papers to sign for access to the fund. "We can transfer it immediately, Mr. Roberts," he said. I thought about the landlord, the debt, the empty fridge. I also thought about Daniel and Claire laughing in some expensive restaurant with no idea what was about to change. But I didn't sign. "Not yet. I'd prefer to wait," I said calmly. The manager looked up. "Wait?" "Yes. I want to fully understand how all this works." "As you wish," he replied, surprised. "But the money is available. I know. But I don't want to use it just to pay bills." He nodded, with a look of respect that needed no words. I stood up, shook his hand, and put the papers in my jacket. I felt their weight, not as a burden, but as a promise. When I left the bank, the world seemed different. The people walked the same. The cars passed the same. The noise was the same. But inside me, something had changed. I no longer felt fear, just a strange, dangerous serenity, the kind felt by men who have nothing left to lose. I walked to a nearby cafe, one I used to visit when I worked there. I sat by the window and ordered an espresso. As the steam from the coffee mixed with the midday light, I opened the envelope again. I read Cameron's letter one more time, but this time his words resonated differently. There was a sentence at the end that I didn't remember noticing the first time. "If your son ever turns his back on you, don't become bitter. Teach him what it's like to live without your shadow. Only then will he learn the value of the shelter he had." I rested my head on my hand and let out a bitter laugh. Cameron had always been wiser than all of us. He knew that ingratitude comes even from those you love most. And he also knew that the best revenge is served not with anger, but with time. When I returned home, the sun was beginning to set. The landlord watched me from the sidewalk, as if waiting for an answer. I just gave him a nod. "Don't worry, Mr. Ernest," I said. "You'll have your money tomorrow." And I meant it. But what he didn't know, what no one knew, was that the money I was going to give him wouldn't come from the fund. It would come from something much bigger. A decision. Because that night, sitting in front of my papers, I knew that life had given me a second chance, and I wasn't going to waste it. Not to save myself, but to teach my son what it feels like when trust is lost. I looked at the sky from the balcony. The city lights flickered like scars, and as the cold wind hit my face, I thought of Lucy. "You were right, my love," I whispered. "What we saved wasn't money. It was dignity." And for the first time since this all began, I smiled without sadness, because I knew the game had just changed. The sound of the phone woke me before dawn. For a moment, I thought it was a call from the bank or the landlord, but when I saw the number on the screen, I felt a pit in my stomach. It was Daniel, my son, the thief of my years. The man who had emptied my account with the coldness of someone pouring a glass of water. For a moment I thought about not answering, but something inside me, a mix of curiosity and resignation, forced me to pick up. "Hello?" I said, my voice dry. "Dad?" The voice on the other end was tense, broken, almost rehearsed. "I need to see you." I didn't ask why. I didn't say anything. I just replied, "Come whenever you want." I hung up, and in that instant, I knew the game had begun. An hour later, I watched him cross the street from my window. He was wearing an expensive suit, but his face was different. Pale, with dark circles under his eyes. He was no longer the arrogant son who despised me, but a man beginning to reap what he had sown. He knocked on the door softly, with the false delicacy of someone who needs something. "Come in," I said, without getting up from my armchair. He entered, looking at everything, as if searching for proof of my misery. His eyes landed on the table, where Cameron's envelope still rested, open, next to the fund documents. I saw his expression change for a split second, though he tried to hide it. "What is that? Dad?" "Nothing that concerns you," I replied, my tone flat. "Sit down." He sat across from me, crossing his legs, faking a calm he didn't possess. "I came to talk to you," he said. "You're already doing it." "Look, Dad." I hung up, and in that instant, I knew the game had begun. An hour later, I watched him cross the street from my window. He was wearing an expensive suit, but his face was different, pale, with dark circles under his eyes. He was no longer the arrogant son who despised me, but a man beginning to reap what he had sown. He knocked on the door softly, with the false delicacy of someone who needs something. "Come in," I said, without getting up from my armchair. "Understand that you stole my life?" He didn't answer. His eyes were looking for any crack to escape through. "Look, Dad, I came to ask for your forgiveness," he finally said, placing his hands on the table. "Forgiveness or help?" I asked. He swallowed hard, and his silence was the answer. I leaned back in my chair, observing him. I wanted to hate him, but I couldn't, because in his tired eyes I saw something I recognized. Fear. The same fear I had when I was young and didn't know if I could feed him. Except my fear was born from love, his, from selfishness. "We lost everything, Dad," he confessed at last. "Claire left. My father-in-law got sicker and we're in debt. The bank closed my accounts. I have nowhere to stay." I felt a chill. "The bank. Life sometimes doesn't need our intervention to serve justice." "And what do you want me to do?" I asked calmly. "I just need a loan, Dad. A little help. I promise I'll pay you back." I laughed. I couldn't help it. A short, dry, bitter laugh. "A loan?" I repeated. "You emptied me, Daniel. You left me without a roof, without food. And now you come to ask me for a loan? Don't talk to me like that, Dad. I'm desperate. And I was desperate when I went to the bank and saw my account empty. But you were on a beach, toasting with champagne. That was a mistake," he insisted. "I won't do it again." I looked at him intently. I saw his jaw tremble, his restless hands, his short breaths. He was a liar caught in his own web. "You know, Daniel," I said slowly, "sometimes life forces you to see things from the other side. You robbed me thinking you were killing me, but thanks to that, I discovered something that neither you nor I knew existed." "What thing?" he asked, confused. "An opportunity." I picked up the envelope and put it in the desk drawer. His eyes followed it like a hungry animal smelling meat. "That's money, isn't it?" he asked in a low voice. "No," I replied, looking him straight in the eye. "It's something more valuable. It's justice." His face hardened. "Dad, you can't just leave me stranded like this." "And you? What did you do when I had nothing to eat?" I replied. "You turned your back on me, Daniel, but I don't hold a grudge. So you're going to help me?" he asked, hopeful. "Of course I am," I said, smiling slightly. "I'm going to help you understand the value of what you lost." He frowned, confused. "I don't understand." "You will. Soon." He stood up abruptly, offended. "Always the same, Dad. Always with your sermons. That's why people walk all over you." "No, son," I said quietly. "People walked all over me because I never learned to say enough. But I have now." He stopped in his tracks. "What are you planning?" "Nothing," I replied calmly. "I'm just going to let time teach you what it took me a lifetime to learn." Daniel snorted angrily. "You're a stubborn old man." "And you're an empty young man?" I replied sadly. "But there's still time for one of us to change." He turned and left, slamming the door. The noise echoed in the small apartment like thunder. I was alone again. But I didn't feel sadness, only a dangerous peace, because something inside me had already decided his fate. I looked at the drawer where I kept the fund documents and murmured, "I'm not going to lose everything again, Daniel. Not this time." That night, as the silence enveloped me, I wrote a sentence in my notebook. "Forgiveness is a luxury, only afforded by those who are no longer afraid." And as I finished writing it, I realized something that shook me. I didn't want revenge. I wanted justice. And I was willing to wait for it, even if it cost me what little life I had left. They say silence is revenge's most elegant disguise. And that phrase, which I heard on the radio many years ago, became my guide during the following weeks. I said nothing. I didn't confront him. I didn't yell at him. I just waited. And while Daniel thought I had forgiven him, I watched his every move with the precision of a watchmaker. On the third day after our conversation, he called me again. "Dad, can we talk?" His voice was softer, almost affectionate. "Of course, son," I replied as if nothing had happened. "Come whenever you want." He arrived with a bag of bread, 2 coffees, and a smile that didn't fool me for a second. "I brought breakfast," he said, setting things on the table. "Like old times." It was curious. When guilt disguises itself as affection, even the bread tastes like a lie. But I feigned gratitude. "Thank you, son." I poured him coffee and offered him a seat. "I'm glad to see you looking calm." "I'm trying to put things back together," he said, looking at the floor. "That's good," I said. "There's always time to do better." He nodded, and for a few minutes we talked as if we were two strangers trying to look like a family. He talked about his job, how he had lost his position, how he was now looking for new opportunities, and in every word I noticed the fear hidden behind his voice. Not fear of losing me, but fear of being cut off from my money. Inside, my mind was already working silently. I had a fund, an envelope, and a share in the bank that changed everything, but I didn't plan on using any of it to save him. Not yet. So I began my strategy with something simple: feigned trust. I asked him if he needed to stay with me for a few days. He pretended to hesitate. "I don't want to bother you, Dad." "You're not a bother, son," I said in a measured voice. "This house could use some noise." He accepted. And that night he slept in his old room again, the same one where he used to hang drawings on the wall and dream of being an astronaut. Now, instead, he slept like a thief seeking refuge in the house he robbed. For the next few days, I watched him without saying anything. I watched how he went through my papers when he thought I wasn't looking, how he opened drawers, how he feigned curiosity, and above all, how his gaze always landed on the same spot: the drawer where I kept Cameron's envelope. One afternoon I found it disturbed. The envelope was where it should be, but it had been moved. I smiled, not in anger, but in confirmation. It was like watching a child reach for a flame, not knowing it will burn. That night we had dinner together. I served lentils, like in the old days. "Remember when your mother used to make these?" I asked him. Daniel looked up, uncomfortable. "Yeah," he murmured. "I liked them a lot." "Me too," I replied. "She always said that life is like this dish. If you have patience and know how to wait, it eventually turns out sweet." He didn't answer. He just kept eating. I, on the other hand, savored every second of that dinner, not for revenge, but because I knew I was reclaiming my role. The father was back. That same night, after he fell asleep, I turned on the lamp and opened an old notebook. I began to write with the calm of someone drawing a map. Objective: to teach. Method: time, tools, truth, dignity, and silence. I didn't need to yell or humiliate him or return the harm with more harm. I just had to let life do its part, and I would push it in the right direction. The next morning I went to the bank. I asked to speak with Manager Perry. "I want to update my contact information," I told him. He looked at me politely. "Of course, Mr. Roberts. Do you wish to register any beneficiaries?" "Yes," I replied. "A new one? Your son?" "No." I smiled calmly. "I'd prefer to put another name." I gave the name of a person I never expected to mention. "Helen Miller, my neighbor from the 4th floor. A kind widow who had helped me with groceries for years and always greeted me with a sincere smile. She, not Daniel, would be my temporary beneficiary." The manager raised an eyebrow. "Are you sure, Mr. Roberts?" "More than ever." Back at home, Daniel was cleaning the patio. It was his way of feigning redemption. "I've been thinking about looking for a job, Dad," he said in a repentant tone. "That's good," I replied. "Work teaches what money hides." I watched him as he spoke. I noticed how his voice sought acceptance, how he needed to feel he could still convince me, and I understood something that hurt me deeply. My son wasn't looking for forgiveness. He was looking for power. That night, while washing the dishes, I remembered Cameron's phrase, "Teach him what it's like to live without your shadow," and I decided the time had come. 2 days later, I suggested he go to the bank with me. "I want you to help me with some paperwork," I said, feigning innocence. He smiled. "Of course, Dad. Whatever you need." We walked together, like father and son, but with an invisible ocean between us. When we arrived, the manager greeted us respectfully. "Good morning, Mr. Roberts." "Good morning," I replied. "This is my son." "A pleasure," Perry said. Daniel looked around with greedy eyes. He knew we were there for something important. I signed some papers, pretended to review others, and then said my goodbyes. On the way home, I told him, "That's it, son. All settled." "And the money?" he asked, trying to sound casual. "Ah, that will come later," I replied with a half smile. "When the time is right." He didn't ask any more questions, but his eyes betrayed him. He knew he was going to come back, and I was waiting for him. That night, as I closed the door, I felt a strange calm. It wasn't joy nor satisfaction. It was justice in its purest form, silent, inevitable, fair. I looked at the sky from the window and whispered, "Lucy, if you could see me now, you'd know I learned to be strong without stopping being good." I turned on the desk lamp. I opened my notebook and wrote a single sentence. The son who steals money loses more than a father. He loses the mirror in which he could recognize himself. I turned off the lamp. I smiled and went to sleep, knowing that for the first time in a long time the board was balanced, and that the next move, when it came, would no longer be mine. It would be fate's. That morning I woke up early, before the sun had fully risen. The air smelled like cold coffee, and I had spent the whole night going over papers, reading every line of the document the bank had given me. There were numbers, percentages, signatures, but above all, there was something I didn't understand. A clause that mentioned legal beneficiaries linked to proven honorability. And that phrase, as strange as it was intriguing, wouldn't leave me alone. I knew there was one person who could help me decipher it. Edward Bennett, an old colleague from the bank, a retired lawyer with whom I had shared coffees, laughs, and silences for over 20 years. He knew Cameron, my deceased boss. If anyone could explain the true purpose of that fund, it was him. I called him, and as soon as he heard my voice, he knew something was wrong. "James, what happened? You haven't called me with that tone in years." "I found something," I said. "Something my boss left me before he died." "Cameron," he murmured, surprised. "That man was always a visionary. Come see me." He gave me his address. He lived in a small, old house in a quiet part of the city. When I arrived, I found him sitting on his patio, with a cup of coffee in his hand, and the same old smile. The years had stooped him, but his gaze was still sharp as a razor. "So, Cameron came back from the beyond to give you more work, huh?" he joked. I laughed, though without enthusiasm. I took out the envelope, the documents, and the letter. "I want you to read these, Edward. I need to know if this is what I think it is." For almost an hour, he reviewed every page with a small magnifying glass. His eyes moved quickly, with concentration. Occasionally he would frown or nod in silence. I waited without saying anything, listening only to the chirping of birds and the sound of the wind moving the leaves of the lemon tree. Finally, he put the papers down on the table and looked at me intently. "James, this isn't just a fund." "What do you mean?" "It's a wealth protection structure, something they did in the 90s. Very rare, very specific. I don't understand." "Cameron created this as a kind of legal shield. If anyone tried to appropriate your assets, be it a third party, a family member, or even an entity, the fund would automatically activate in your favor." I looked at him breathless. "Are you saying?" "Exactly," he nodded. "That if your son, for example, illegally accessed your account and emptied your savings, this fund now makes you a priority creditor against any subsequent movement to your detriment." "A priority creditor?" "In simple terms. The bank is obligated to protect you, and anyone who stole from you is now in a position of legal debt to you." I fell silent. I couldn't believe it. Cameron, without knowing it, had left me a tool to defend myself even from my own son's betrayal. Edward smiled tenderly. "Cameron always said you were too good, James, that the world would take advantage of you. And wasn't he right?" I replied bitterly. "No, but he left you insurance. Not just financial, but moral. Look at this additional clause." He pointed to an underlined paragraph. "The holder may decide the final destination of the fund, provided it serves to honor loyalty, humility, or justice." And what does that mean? It means you decide who to reward and who to exclude. You can make wills regarding this fund, donate it, or leave it as a conditional inheritance. I stared at the paper for a long time. Every letter seemed to burn my eyes. It wasn't just money. It was a form of power. And for the first time in my life I understood what it felt like to have control. "Edward," I said in a low voice, "if I wanted to, I could leave my son out." "Of course. It's completely legal. And if I wanted to leave everything to someone else, that too. You could even divide it, but the condition is that it must be done while you are alive." "While I'm alive?" I repeated thoughtfully. He watched me in silence. "James, Don't use it for revenge. Cameron didn't intend it for that. I don't want revenge, I answered him. I want Daniel to learn what I couldn't teach him. And how do you plan to do that? I don't know yet. But I know it has to hurt. Not in his wallet, but in his soul. Edward sighed. Be careful, my friend. When a father punishes, he runs the risk of punishing himself. I nodded. I knew, but I couldn't go back now. Before I left, he gave me a copy of the documents and a card with his number. Call me if you need to formalize anything. I can help you draft the change of beneficiaries. Thank you, Edward. And James, he said before I walked out, sometimes justice is slow, but it always arrives. Just make sure you're still the man Cameron believed you were. His words followed me all the way home. The sky was overcast, and the autumn wind smelled of wet earth. I thought about my life, about the years wasted trying to protect a son who didn't understand the meaning of effort. I thought about Lucy, about her soft hands and her sweet voice telling me, don't let the pain make you cruel. And for a moment I hesitated, but when I got home and saw the desk drawer slightly open, the same one Daniel had rummaged through, the doubt vanished. He had been back, and he was still searching. That night I sat down to write a letter. Not one of love, nor of farewell, but one of warning. A moral testament. If you are reading this, son, it means life decided to teach you what I could not. Don't look for my money. Look for your shame, because what you stole wasn't silver. It was trust. And when a man loses that, not even the purest gold can buy it back. I put the letter away with the documents. I turned off the light, and before I slept, I promised myself something. I would not save him again. Not one more time. Time would do it for me. And I, in the meantime, would just have to wait. The next day the phone rang again. It was Daniel again. Dad, I need to see you. This time his voice sounded different. It was no longer false guilt. It was fear. I smiled sadly. The silent plan was still in motion, and the clock had finally started ticking in my favor. I never imagined that watching my son fall would hurt me so much. Not even when he emptied my savings did I feel a pain as deep as the one I felt in those days. Because the punishment life was dealing him wasn't coming from me. It was coming from fate. And fate, when it settles accounts, does not forgive. It all began a few weeks after my visit to the lawyer. Daniel stopped coming by the house. I didn't call him. I knew that if I did, I would break the silence that was punishing him more than any of my words could. The first rumor came from a neighbor. James, did you know your son was fired? I just nodded. I didn't feign surprise. The bank where he worked closed his branch and fired him with a cold letter, the kind that doesn't even come with a signature of thanks. His world was collapsing, and for the first time, no one was there to catch him. A few days later, I learned that Claire, his wife, had left. She left with her suitcases and the daughter from her previous marriage, leaving him only a note on the refrigerator. I can't stay with a man who blames everyone but himself. And so, the son who once told me there's no room for you at the table was left alone, sitting at an empty table. I watched him from a distance. He was living a few blocks from my house, in a small apartment he had rented with what little he had left. I saw him pass on the street, thinner, his face haggard. He avoided making eye contact with me, as if I were the mirror he could no longer bear to look at. And maybe I was. One afternoon I ran into him in front of the supermarket. He was carrying a bag with old bread and 2 cans of food. He saw me, hesitated for a moment, and lowered his head. "Good afternoon, Dad," he murmured. "Good afternoon, Daniel." He walked past without stopping. I didn't call out to him. I just watched him walk away, my heart heavy. When I saw him turn the corner, a thought crossed my mind like lightning. Sometimes the purest love is the one that knows how to watch without intervening. The days grew slow. I continued my routine calmly. Breakfast, read the newspaper, walk to the boardwalk. But inside me something was watching Daniel's world like a silent judge. It wasn't revenge. It was justice in its cruelest form, letting pride crumble under its own weight. One afternoon I received a call from an unknown number. It was Manager Perry. "Mr. Roberts, I'm informing you that your son has attempted to access the system using your name." I remained silent. "And?" I asked. "He tried to apply for a loan against your fund, but he was blocked automatically." "Blocked? Yes. The protocol that Mr. Cameron activated is still in effect. No operation can be carried out without your signature. I nodded, though he couldn't see me. Thank you for letting me know, Mr. Perry. You're welcome, sir. And, if I may say, you have a guardian angel in heaven. I hung up with a mixture of sadness and relief. My son was no longer stealing out of necessity, but out of desperation, and that was the worst poverty of all. 2 days later, someone knocked on my door. It was Julian, a young man from the neighborhood who worked for a courier service. He had an envelope. "It's from your son, Mr. Roberts," he said, looking down. "He asked me to deliver it to you." The envelope was wrinkled, with my name handwritten on it. Inside, a short letter, written in smeared ink. "Dad, I have nothing left. No job, no home, no wife. Only shame. I'm not asking for money, just that you don't hate me. If you see me on the street one day, don't cross to the other side. Just look at me so I know I still exist. Daniel." I stared at it for a long time. The tears came without warning, silent, hot, inevitable. Not because he was asking for forgiveness, but because at last he understood. And although part of me wanted to run and find him, the other half held me back. The silence still had work to do. That night, I dreamed of Lucy. I dreamed we were in the kitchen making coffee. She looked at me, with that smile she always had when I was in doubt. "Don't be afraid, James," she said. "Pain teaches too." "But he's my son, Lucy," I replied in the dream. "Yes. And sons must also learn to fall. Only then will they know how to get up." I woke up with damp eyes and a decision made. I wouldn't help him with money, but I wouldn't abandon him completely. The next day I went to the bank. "I want to make a symbolic transfer," I told the manager. "Symbolic?" "Yes, $50. "To whom?" "My son." He looked at me surprised, but didn't ask any more questions. I signed the paper and left the bank with a calm soul. That small sum wasn't charity, it was a seed, a hidden message that only he would understand. I am not abandoning you, but I am not saving you. Months passed. Daniel started working at a mechanic shop, cleaning cars. I found out from Edward, my lawyer friend, who had seen him by chance. "He's different, James," he told me. "Quiet, humble," I smiled. "Maybe." One afternoon I saw him from afar, sitting in a park. His clothes were stained with grease, and his hands were chapped, but there was something new in his face. Peace. The kind of peace that only comes when you look in the mirror without lies. I didn't approach him. I just watched him, and in silence I thanked God for giving me the strength not to intervene, because sometimes the wisest parents aren't the ones who rescue, but the ones who wait. That night, in my notebook, I wrote, "My son lost money, but he gained a soul. I lost peace of mind, but I regained faith. And the fund Cameron left me wasn't a fund of money. It was a fund of lessons." I closed the notebook, turned off the light, and looked out the window. The moon was shining over the city rooftops, and for the first time in a long time, I felt I could sleep peacefully, because I understood that my son's collapse was not his end. It was his beginning. 1 year. Exactly 1 year had passed since I last saw my son. 12 months of silence, of long nights, of identical days. 12 months in which I learned that time doesn't erase wounds, but it does teach them to breathe without hurting so much. That Tuesday dawned calmly. The air smelled of rain, and the sky had that melancholy gray that reminded me of Lucy, of her days of tea and old blankets. I had decided to go to the bank to sign some papers with Manager Perry. Simple procedures, nothing special. Update my share as a fund stockholder, and confirm my temporary beneficiary, Helen Miller, my neighbor. I had no idea that, behind that routine, fate had a pending appointment for me with my own past. I entered the bank with slow steps, the same as always. The new employees didn't know me, but the older ones greeted me with a mixture of respect and affection. The guard, a kind young man, opened the door for me with a smile. "Good morning, Mr. Roberts." "Good morning, son," I replied, with that warm tone that escaped me unintentionally. I walked down the central aisle. The marble floor shone, the fans whirred, and the murmur of conversations filled the air with that sound you only learn to love when you've worked for decades within those walls. It was like coming home. While waiting for Perry, I sat in one of the armchairs in the main lobby, and that's when I saw him, Daniel, my son, The same one who had emptied my account a year ago. The one who left me without a roof or bread was standing at the counter. His hair was shorter, his beard grown out, and he held a folder in his hand. He was dressed neatly, though in worn clothes, and on his face, where there was once arrogance, there was now nervousness and exhaustion. He didn't see me at first, but when he turned, his gaze met mine. It was a moment suspended in the air. Neither of us knew what to do. He was the first to break the silence. "Dad." His voice was low, broken, loaded with a shame I had never heard before. I didn't respond. I just watched him. The bank suddenly seemed to fade away. Only he and I remained, like two souls separated by time to make them understand. Manager Perry came out of his office at that moment. "Mr. Roberts," he said, shaking my hand warmly. "I was just about to call you. Please, come in." Daniel took a step back, confused. "Do you work here?" "I don't work here anymore," I replied slowly. "But a part of me still belongs to this place." I saw him frown. He didn't understand, and I was in no hurry to explain. I went into the office with Perry, but I left the door ajar. From my seat, I could still see him, waiting in the hallway, folder in hand. Destiny, I thought, has a cruel and perfect sense of humor. "Here is everything, Mr. Roberts," Perry said, handing me the papers. "We just need your signature to ratify your participation as a preferred stockholder." "Perfect," I replied, taking the pen. I signed calmly while my gaze repeatedly drifted to the glass, to the figure of Daniel, who was still there, restless, talking to a receptionist. Perry noticed my distraction. "Is everything all right?" "Yes, everything is fine. It's just that. Life sometimes insists on giving us back what we didn't ask for." He smiled, not understanding. We finished the paperwork, and he put the copies in a folder. "Would you like me to walk you out, Mr. Roberts?" "No, thank you," I replied. "I still have something pending." I left the office and walked toward where Daniel was standing. When he saw me approach, he lowered his gaze. "Dad, I didn't know that." "You didn't know a lot of things, son," I interrupted. "But today you're going to learn one more." I signaled for the manager to come over. Perry understood immediately. "Do you know this young man?" he asked, playing along. "Yes," I said. "He is my son." The manager nodded and turned to Daniel. "Ah, so you are Mr. Roberts, Jr. You just submitted a loan application, correct?" Daniel turned pale. "Yes, but I didn't know he was here." "It doesn't matter," I said calmly. "Sometimes coincidences help to clarify things." Perry, looking uncomfortable, reviewed the folder Daniel had submitted. "Your application has been denied, Mr. Roberts. You do not meet the minimum requirements." "Denied?" Daniel repeated, stunned. "But the bank cannot grant credit to someone with a history of family fraud and accounts closed due to irregularities," the manager replied in a firm voice. Daniel looked at me, his eyes wide, as if he had just discovered a terrible secret. "You did this, Dad?" "No, son," I replied calmly. "You did. A year ago, when you decided to take everything from me. The silence that followed was almost sacred. I could see him swallow, see his hands tremble, see his pride crumble in front of everyone. And then, without anger, without irony, I told him, when you stole from my account, you thought you were leaving me with nothing. But what you didn't know was that the bank had another account, a fund that your greed couldn't touch." "A fund?" he whispered. "Yes, a fund my boss created 30 years ago to protect me from life and from myself. And now, are you going to use it to humiliate me?" "No," I shook my head. "You already humiliated yourself. I just came to sign the last part of the process." "What process?" I looked him straight in the eye. "The one that turns a poor man into a free one. You don't understand? Oh, maybe you do, but you don't want to accept it." He turned to the manager. "Mr. Perry, I need to speak with you." "Of course, but I can't help you." Perry put the papers away and concluded, "The primary account belongs to your father, and he is now a preferred stockholder in the bank." Daniel's face changed. In his eyes something appeared that I had never seen. Respect, not fear, not envy, respect. "Dad," he said, his voice barely audible, "I didn't know any of this." "I know. I thought you had lost everything." "I did," I replied, "but not what you thought." "What did you lose then?" the illusion that my son understood the value of work. There was a long silence. In the back of the bank, someone was dialing numbers. The hanging clock went tick-tock, and the sound of money counting seemed like a cruel reminder of what had separated us. "Dad," he said at last, "let me make it up to you." I smiled sadly. "You can't give me back 30 years of sacrifice, Daniel, but you can still learn not to repeat them with your own." He lowered his head. "I've changed." "I know," I said. "I saw it in your hands. You're working now, right?" He nodded. "At a mechanic shop." "Then stay there. Don't be ashamed. Honest work cleanses the soul." "Dad!" His eyes filled with tears. "Will you ever be able to forgive me?" I looked at him for a long time before answering. "There hasn't been a day that I haven't, son. But forgiveness isn't a word. It's a path. Start walking it yourself." When we said goodbye, there were no hugs, just a handshake. Firm, sincere, silent. And in that gesture without words, I knew the lesson had landed where it needed to. Before leaving the bank, I turned back to him. "Daniel," I said, my voice serious, "there's something else you should know." "What is it?" "I've decided that when I die, you will not inherit my fund." I saw him flinch. But I continued, "Not because I hate you, but because I don't want money to give you back what pain has taught you." "Then, who will it be for?" "For someone who understands that value isn't measured in numbers." "And who is that?" I smiled. "They don't know it yet. But one day, when you have a son of your own, you will." I walked out of the bank with a steady step. The fresh air hit my face, and the gray sky began to open, letting a ray of sunlight through. I paused for a moment on the sidewalk and took a deep breath. Behind me, through the glass, I could see Daniel still standing, looking at the floor. For the first time in a long time, I no longer felt anger. I felt peace. The cycle had closed. The father and son had swapped roles, not to destroy each other, but to recognize each other. I walked toward the corner, with the feeling that Lucy was walking with me. I could hear her voice soft in my memory. "You did well, James. You didn't punish him. You made him grow." And as the sun finished breaking through the clouds, I knew that day wasn't the end of anything. It was the beginning of a new story. Clean. Different. A story where at last justice and love could coexist in the same heart. I couldn't sleep that night. After the encounter with Daniel, the silence in my house felt heavier than ever. The dining room clock marked the seconds as if counting my thoughts. Every tick-tock was a question I didn't want to answer. Had I done the right thing? Was it fair to take the inheritance away from my own son, even after everything? I turned on the lamp, took the notebook where I used to write my reflections, and sat at the table. The house smelled of old wood, cold coffee, and memories. The envelope from the fund was there, closed, waiting like a silent witness to my entire life. I opened it one last time. I took out the documents, Cameron's letter, and the copies that the lawyer, Bennett, had helped me sign. I read every line slowly, with the calm of someone saying goodbye. And then I saw something I hadn't noticed before. A handwritten note in the bottom margin of the contract. The handwriting was unmistakable. It was Cameron's. "James, this fund isn't just money. It's a key. Use it to close what hurts you or to open what you're missing. But don't keep it in silence. Love that is kept silent also dies." I stared at those words until tears blurred my vision. Cameron, even from the past, had known this day would come, and I understood that justice without love wasn't justice. It was just pride dressed up as reason. The next morning, I went to see Edward Bennett, my old lawyer friend. "I want to make a change to the fund," I told him as soon as I entered his office. He looked at me cautiously. "Are you sure? You just recently decided to exclude your son." "Yes, and I still feel the same way. But I want to leave something prepared. Something he cannot receive by inheritance, but by merit." He opened his eyes, curious. "Explain." "I want that. When I die, this fund doesn't transfer automatically. I want it to be locked until Daniel meets one condition, which is that he proves he has helped someone without asking for anything in return, that he works, that he donates, that he serves, that he understands the value of sacrifice." Edward smiled sadly. "You are a just man, James." "No," I shook my head. I'm just a father who refuses to let his son repeat my mistakes. I signed the new documents. Every stroke of the pen was a farewell, but also a hope. When I finished, Edward extended his hand. Cameron would be proud of you. And Lucy too, I replied, holding back my emotions. Do you want me to register the change? Yes, but keep it sealed and confidential. No one should know until the time comes. Leaving the office, the sun was shining with a clarity that hurt my eyes. It was as if the world was telling me, "You can rest now." I walked down the street slowly, looking at the trees, the faces, the life that continued its course, unaware that an old man had just signed his inner peace. I passed by the workshop where Daniel worked. I saw him from the sidewalk, his hands stained with grease, helping an elderly customer lift the hood of a car. He didn't see me, and he didn't need to. I watched him in silence, and for the first time, I felt pride. Cameron, even from the past, had known this day would come, and I understood that justice without love wasn't justice. It was just pride dressed up as reason. The next morning, I went to see Edward Bennett, my old lawyer friend. I want to make a change to the fund, I told him as soon as I entered his office. He looked at me cautiously. Are you sure? You just recently decided to exclude your son. Yes, and I still feel the same way. But I want to leave something prepared. Now, years later, I understood what she meant. Peace is also justice, just a quieter kind. I ate alone, but without sadness. And before going to bed, I wrote one last note in my notebook. Today I close my story with Daniel, not with anger, but with love. Money is spent, but lessons remain. If one day my son learns to give without expecting anything, the bank will know what to do, and if not, let life run its course. I have already done my part. I closed the notebook, turned off the light, and listened to the sound of the wind hitting the blinds. I didn't feel guilt. I didn't feel fear. Just a serenity I had never felt before. At dawn the phone rang. It was Helen, my neighbor. Mr. Roberts, will you be needing anything from the market today? She asked, as always. No, my dear, thank you. But please come by for a moment. I want to talk to you. She came up shortly after, with a smile and a bag of warm bread. I briefly told her what I had done, the change to the fund, my decision. She listened to me attentively, in silence, and at the end she said, That's not revenge, Mr. Roberts. That's love disguised as a lesson. I smiled. Maybe. But don't say it too loud, or you'll ruin my reputation as a grumpy old man. We laughed. I asked her for a favor. The day I am gone, give this to Daniel. I gave her a sealed letter, but only if he meets the condition I'm about to tell you. And how will I know when the time is right? You'll know, I replied, when you see in his eyes the same look I had the day I lost everything. She nodded respectfully, put the letter in her purse, and hugged me without saying anything. It was a simple hug, but filled with something I had been missing for years: humanity. The months passed peacefully. Daniel continued to work. Occasionally someone from the neighborhood would see him helping neighbors with repairs without charging a dime. I closed the notebook, turned off the light, and listened to the sound of the wind hitting the blinds. I didn't feel guilt. I didn't feel fear. Just a serenity I had never felt before. At dawn the phone rang. It was Helen, my neighbor. Mr. Roberts, will you be needing anything from the market today? She asked, as always. No, my dear, thank you. But please come by for a moment. I want to talk to you. She came up shortly after, with a smile and a bag of warm bread. Just the certainty that love, however late, had returned. That night, before sleeping, I opened Cameron's letter one last time. I touched it carefully, as if holding a piece of destiny. His final words seemed like a prescient farewell. James, if you read this when you are already old, don't forget that the best inheritances are not left in a bank, but in the memory of those who change because of you. I turned off the lamp, looked at the ceiling, and smiled. Because I understood that the real twist wasn't in the fund or the money or even in Daniel. The real twist was in me. I had ceased to be a wounded father and had become a man at peace. The day of James Roberts's funeral dawned gray but calm. It wasn't raining, and the air smelled of freshly turned earth. Daniel stood in front of the grave, hands buried in his pockets, his eyes fixed on the headstone engraved with his father's name. James Roberts 1959 to 2024. He worked, he loved, and he waited. There were no extra phrases. It was a brief, sober, dignified farewell. Like him. Around him, only a few people. Neighbors, the old lawyer Edward Bennett, and Helen Miller, the woman from the fourth floor. She held a brown envelope in her hands, her gaze never leaving the casket. When it was all over, she approached Daniel with slow steps. "Your father asked me to give this to you," she said, holding out the envelope. "What is it?" he asked, unsure. "A letter. But he made me promise I would only give it to you when I knew you had changed." Daniel stood in silence, looking at the envelope as if it weighed a lifetime. Helen touched his arm gently. "And I believe you have." 2 days passed before he dared to open it. The letter remained on his table, next to a cup of coffee that grew cold, untouched. Finally, one night, when the silence of the workshop became unbearable, he broke the seal. His father's handwriting, firm and clear, filled 3 pages. He read slowly, feeling each line speak directly to his heart. "Son, if you are reading this, it means time has done what my words could not. I don't know if you forgave me, or if I ever fully forgave you, but it doesn't matter anymore. What matters is that you are here, and that you are still trying to be a better man. I would be lying if I said what you did didn't hurt me. It hurt more than poverty, more than loneliness. But over the years I learned that children don't hurt us out of malice, but out of ignorance. They ignore what it costs to build a life. They ignore how much it hurts to see the love one gives be wasted. That's why I didn't punish you. I just waited. Because time, my son, teaches what no father can teach by force. I left something prepared for you. Not a fund, not money, but a condition. When you help someone in need without expecting anything in return, when you feel you are doing it out of conviction and not for redemption, the bank will know. And that day, without you having to ask, they will give you what is yours. Not by inheritance, but by merit. If that moment never comes, don't blame yourself. You will have already received what I truly wanted to leave you, the chance to change. Remember this, Daniel. Love isn't shown when one gives, but when one is able to lose without being destroyed. Your mother would be proud if she could see you now, and so am I. With love, your father, James Roberts. When he finished reading, Daniel let the letter fall onto the table. The tears held back for years finally found their way out. They weren't tears of guilt. They were tears of understanding. He got up, opened the window, and looked at the sky. The clouds had cleared and a soft light filtered through. For the first time in a long time, his breathing felt light. That same week, at the workshop, an elderly man arrived with an old car and an exhausted face. "I don't have the money to fix it now, son," he said humbly. "But I need to get my wife to the hospital." Daniel looked at him, thought for a moment, and replied, "Don't worry about it. I'll fix it anyway." He spent hours under the sun, cleaning, adjusting, welding parts. When the engine roared back to life, the old man hugged him, crying, "God bless you, kid." Daniel just smiled. He didn't ask for anything. And that night, walking home, he felt a deep, new, different kind of peace. 2 days later, he received a call from the bank. A formal voice spoke on the other end of the line. "Mr. Daniel Roberts?" "Yes. We are informing you that your account has been reactivated in accordance with a special clause in the Wealth Protection Fund of your father, Mr. James Roberts." "I'm sorry. What?" "Your father left specific instructions. The fund is to be released once a condition has been met." "What condition?" The voice on the phone sounded soft, almost human. "To help without expecting reward." Daniel fell silent. He looked at the letter on his table and smiled through his tears. "Then I guess I already met it." That night he went to the cemetery. He left a flower on the grave and said in a low voice, "You did it, Dad. I learned." The wind blew gently through the cypress trees, and for an instant he could have sworn he heard a distant, familiar voice murmuring in the leaves. "I knew you would, son." And for the first time, Daniel felt he was no longer alone, or poor, or lost, just at peace. "It's been 15 years since I buried my father. 15 years since I opened that letter that changed my life forever. Sometimes I think he didn't really leave, that his voice is still hidden in the simple things of everyday life, in the sound of the engine I'm fixing, in the smell of fresh coffee, in the silence of dawn before anyone else is awake." I have a son now. His name is James, after him. And every time I watch him sleep, I wonder if he'll one day judge me the way I judged my father. Maybe. Maybe that's how life works. It takes children years to understand what their parents keep silent. After his death, everything changed. The bank fund was released, and with it, the chance to start over. I didn't use that money to buy cars or houses like I would have before. I used it to build a small community workshop where underprivileged kids can learn mechanics, carpentry, and electrical work. I named it after him. The James Roberts Foundation, Workshop of Dignity. The first day we opened, I hung his photo on the wall, right by the entrance. It's the same one he had at home. Him in his gray suit, a discreet smile, and that look in his eyes that seemed to know everything without needing to speak. Every time a kid walks through that door, I introduce them to my father with pride. I tell them, he taught me that work doesn't just feed you, it also cleanses the soul. At first, many of these kids arrive lost, just like I once was. Some come with records, others with stories of abandonment, of mistakes, of broken pride, and in each of them, I see a little of myself. That's why I don't judge them. I just teach them, the way my father taught me, in silence. Sometimes, when I'm alone in the workshop, I talk to him. I tell him how things are going, about the kids who graduated, the families who got back on their feet. I tell him his legacy wasn't left in the bank or in those papers, but in every hand that learned to fix something broken. And in those moments I feel his presence, as if he were sitting across from me, smiling with that serene expression that irritated me so much as a child. Helen Miller, the neighbor who gave me his letter, is still alive, though she can't walk well anymore. I visit her sometimes. She always says the same thing. Your father would be so happy, Daniel, not because of what you did with the money, but because of what you did with yourself. And I answer her. He taught me how to win without needing revenge. She nods, and we both sit in silence, remembering the man who changed 2 lives without ever raising his voice. My son, little James, is 12. He likes getting his hands dirty with grease, just like me. When something breaks in the house, he comes running and says, "Dad, let me try." And I smile, because in his eyes I see curiosity, but also respect, that exact mix that defines a good man. He asked me about his grandfather recently. I told him he was a fair, hard-working, and patient man, that he taught me not to give up, and not to confuse love with weakness. "And did you love him, Dad?" he asked. I looked him in the eye and answered without hesitation, "Yes, but I learned to love him late." Why? Because to understand a good father, you first have to fail as a son. He stayed quiet, thinking. Then he hugged me, and in that hug I felt all the wounds of the past finally scar over. A few months ago I received a letter from the bank. It was a formal notification. The fund was permanently closed. There was no remaining balance. But inside the envelope, there was something unexpected. A handwritten note from Manager Perry, who still worked there. "Mr. Roberts, your father left one final instruction dated the day before his death. When the fund is depleted, I don't want it to be empty. I want it to be transformed into whatever my son chooses to build with his life. I believe you have fulfilled that wish. Thank you for continuing his legacy." I stared at that paper for a long time, my eyes wet. My father had planned everything, right up to the end. Even his absence was filled with purpose. One afternoon, after closing the workshop, I stayed behind, sweeping the floor. The sun came through the window, reflecting off the tools hanging on the wall. I heard the wind moving the tin roof, and for a moment I had the feeling someone was next to me. I didn't see him, but I felt him. That calm, that different air, that silence full of presence. "Thanks, old man," I murmured. And in my mind I heard his reply, as clear as the first time he spoke to me about dignity. "Don't thank me, son. Just keep teaching." I understand now that the greatest inheritance wasn't the money or the fund. It was the transformation. My father took everything from me to give me back to myself. And although it took me years to understand, today I know that was his purest act of love. The cycle is complete. The son who betrayed the father became the man who honors his memory every day. And the grandson who bears his name will learn from example, not from pain. This morning, as we were walking to the workshop, my son took my hand and said, "Dad, when I grow up, I want to be like Grandpa." "And what was he like?" I asked, curious. "He was someone who knew how to forgive. he replied with a smile. I didn't know what to say. I just squeezed his hand tightly and looked at the sky. The sun was high, bright, and for an instant I thought I saw a silhouette walking in the light. My father, serene, smiling. And I understood, with a peaceful heart, that true inheritances are not inherited. They are continued. Sometimes it isn't death that separates parents from children, but pride, the lack of forgiveness, the silences we let grow between us. James and Daniel learned that true love isn't measured in money or inheritances, but in the courage to recognize mistakes and the strength to change. Tell me in the comments, have you ever reconciled with someone when you thought it was already too late? If this story touched your heart, give it a like, subscribe to William's Revenge Stories, and join us for the next story, where a new voice will remind you that it's never too late to heal.